Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good to see everybody. Welcome to Primetime at the BU Library. Primetime at the BU Library's mission is to encourage lifelong learning beyond the classroom for the entire Bethel community, and is a collaboration of the Friends for the BU Library and many different offices on campus. Faculty and students, February 15th is the deadline for the $250 Library Research Prize. Faculty, if you had a student that submitted a project or paper in the last 2 semesters or interim that extensively used library resources like books, articles, equipment, and other library services, please encourage them to submit. Information is on the library website, or they can ask the library staff for more information. The application does not require additional research beyond the project submitted as coursework, only an additional short essay about the research process. Be sure to join us on Tuesday, February 14th for our 4th annual Black History Month musical and literary review. Our very own Dr. Herb Johnson of the Music Department and Angela Shannon of the English Department will be sharing a wonderful program in music and reading. But today, we will welcome Dr. Jade Rasmussen as he presents the first of 3 Talk About Teaching presentations entitled, Are Your Students Learning? Foundational Issues in Assessing Student Learning in Your Classroom. Let's welcome him.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. And hopefully our numbers will build here as we get started. And
Right.
the next workshop's coming up, too. This is the first of a 3-part series. And these are the 2 other workshops that will be coming up connected with the series. The first will be on the idea of traditional assessments, and what we'll be looking at there is really when are they appropriate to use. We'll also take a look at what some common problems are as instructors go about preparing traditional forms of assessment. We'll be looking at how to avoid clues, to test wise students. We'll be doing that, and then we'll spend some time looking at some guidelines on how to write particularly well-written true-false items and matching items, and just all the different types of traditional items. The April 19th session then is going to focus on performance assessments. And again, we'll start off by looking at when are these really appropriate to use, versus traditional assessment. We'll be looking at how to write them well, and then we'll be looking at really how to convey feedback to students. I'll be sharing probably 4 or 5 different devices that you can use to communicate feedback to students, and hopefully some devices that don't take hours and hours and hours for the instructor to use. And we'll also talk a little bit here too about what some of the research shows on student feedback. What is it that students really want in terms of feedback? What is most beneficial to them? So we'll be doing that as well too. So today's session really though is going to focus on what I'm calling foundational issues when it comes to assessment. And I really have 3 what I'm calling learning targets. Sometimes I like to use this jargon instead of objectives. It sounds just a little bit different for students. But the first one is going to be really to just kind of focus a little bit on what the value of assessment is. Why should we spend our time thinking about it, working so hard at it? We'll spend time with that. And then we'll be taking a look at really the writing of objectives. I think that you can't really teach about assessment, if you're not talking in some way about objectives, because obviously there's a strong connection between the 2. So we'll spend actually quite a bit of time with that. And then third part, I'd like to just lay out what I'm just calling some guiding principles of effective assessment, and give you a chance to think about your assessments and how those connect, with those guiding principles. So that's really what we've got in terms of our learning targets today. I want to get at just 2 terms that are often used, some academic vocabulary, if you want to call it that, related to the whole area of assessment. We commonly use the term measurement and assessment is often how we describe things. And often they're used incorrectly, those 2 terms. So I'd like to spend just a little bit of time just seeing what we really mean by measurement, what we really mean by assessment. Because really the focus of the workshop today and actually the next 2 is really going to be on assessment. Okay? So let's take a look at some definitions of these 2. And then I'd like you to think what seems to be the primary difference between what we're calling measurement and assessment. Okay? So let's just start with measurement. Here's what we're talking about. Okay, so the assigning of numbers to the results of a test or other type of assessment according to some specific rule you might have, could be correct answers, points. Okay, so this is what we're talking about with measurement. Okay, when we talk about assessment then, it's going to be a general term, refers to a full range of procedures that you might use, designed to gain information about student learning, the formation of value judgments concerning that learning process. So what would you say would be the distinction, between measurement and assessment? What really stands out to you there as the big difference here? Okay. Assessment can be quantitative also. It certainly can be. What other differences might you see here between the two?
Well, one looks more summative and the other looks more formative.
Yeah.
In terms of, in assessing, you talk about learning progress.
So assessment actually can be formative and summative as well, too.
Seems like also the measurement piece is more objective, the assessment is some judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think anyhow the bigger difference between the two is really that assessment is involving some type of value judgment, that's coming across. Measurement, we're just talking about you got 18 out of 20 correct, period. Okay? When we talk assessment then, now we're putting some value judgment on it. Okay, we're saying, for example, this is A work, this is B work, this is C work, this is high quality work, not high quality work. So I think a real difference between the two, and the important difference, is really that value judgment that comes into play. And I think when we start making value judgments or having students make value judgments on their own work, all of a sudden they get really interested in the process. Okay, and I think it becomes much more difficult for us, and I think it also becomes a lot more sensitive, for students and entities too. So when we're talking, throughout the workshop today and in the future, this is really what we're talking about. It can be a full range of procedures, and it can be quantitative, qualitative, but there is going to be some kind of value judgment that's coming there. So it gets pretty touchy, for students at times.
Jay,
Mm-hmm.
I tend to, on my syllabus, put evaluation for that
Mm-hmm.
section.
Mhm.
Where does that term fit with these two?
Yeah, good question. I would say it's kind of a middle. I don't know. Maybe some other people want to take some shots at that one. I know Gretchen, you work with it. Sarah, you work with it. The idea of evaluation. To me, evaluation implies some kind of judgment as well too. But yeah.
It's a little softer.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think to understand it, sometimes more than assessment. I think using the terms assessment, I try to explain what that is. Because assessment, when they all they hear is judgment, as opposed to the evaluation that you hear that maybe I'm going to listen a little bit more to what you have to say. I don't know, just in some of the students say it sometimes feels a little soft. But if you explain assessment, that it's listening to you and hearing what you have to say, what would your stuff is to it. I think students just want to be heard. Also to use words that probably feel like you're going to actually look at them when you're looking at their works.
Your thoughts, Sarah?
No, I think about assessment and measurement at a different scale. Thinking about measurement as kind of overall progress, and it is a value it's a value that you give at the end of the semester. It's the final measure of kind of how the students did overall, and assessments are the smaller pieces that lead to that overall measurement at the end of the semester. So I think about them a little bit differently. So I don't really know where I would put evaluation in there.
I do think with assessment, though, you can, and I said it before, but I think you can really think in terms of formative and summative. I think those are both, too. So they're messy, they're really messy terms, and it depends a little bit where you're pulling definitions, too. But I guess the main thing that I want us to pull from this is it can really be a range of procedures that can be used, and typically there is some kind of value judgment that comes there. And it could be the student making the value judgment, or it could be the faculty as well. So it's a pretty complex process. Yeah. I'd like you to think and talk a little bit, if you could, with the partner about what you see the value of assessment being, okay, in terms of that overall educational process. Okay, so let's pull back together again if we could here.
Assess whether or not they're
Can each group just share briefly kind of one, two things that came out of your discussion then? What would you like to share? What would make sense? So kind of pick something here if you could.
Assessment can be useful in determining early on whether the educational process is working for a particular student. So you can identify early if there's a student that's struggling and needs to switch how they're learning.
A formative assessment in a sense. Helps you kind of see, but also helps them see, if they're struggling in some way too. Okay? Other things you saw, other value you saw coming from assessment. Anything else?
I think we talked about assessment in the middle of the process towards a goal, and whether it's the end of the course or a particular project within the course, that it really helps students understand what they need to do to accomplish that goal well.
Okay, good. Okay. Now how about this group here? Kind of you too.
One of the things I thought of is I think assessment is a broad term, and there's lots of pieces that go into that. And so I try to do things in my class that pull from different sets of skills, so that the overall grade is based on a variety of things. So the assessment is just the overall, that includes so many different things in those measurements and pieces of that assessment.
And typically that's some of your most effective assessment. It's that triangulation of data. You're making judgments, based on a variety of data points, that you've got. Usually you've got a little more validity, to your assessment then as well too.
I'm not sure about that, but I give it a shot.
Yeah, exactly. And then how about W and Keith? What thoughts came out of your thoughts?
It also helps us figure out what we're doing well and what we need to change about how we're teaching.
Yeah. So it's clearly about the student learning, but it's also really providing some meaningful direction for us. Like, is this working?
Right.
What
No
I'm
one's
doing
getting
here?
it.
And who is it working for? And why is it working? Why is it not working? All those kind of things too. Yeah. So just obviously a lot of different values, can be drawn from assessment. We could build the list, a lot more, I'm sure too. But I think anytime we talk about assessment, we've really got to talk about, backward design. And that's a bit kind of educational jargon, in some way, but I just can't talk about assessment without talking backward design. And this is really what we're talking about with backward design. And kind of in a nutshell, the idea being that we're really trying to think up front about what objectives are really going to be critical for this learning experience. And in a sense, we're trying to think, what is the end product that we're really hoping for in this group of students we have? What kind of knowledge do we want them to have? What type of skills do we want them to have? What kind of dispositions do we want them to have? And in a sense, it's almost picturing your students as they come out of your course at the end. Okay? But we're trying to think about that up front. What is it we really want built in, to those students? And that's really defining that up front. And then the next part of the backward design model is really thinking, what is the evidence that I can look at that will help me know that they really have accomplished, what these objectives are. So what is it that I can read that they might produce? What is it that I can see? What is it that I can hear? Okay. But what is that evidence that would really be convincing to me, convincing to them that, hey, they've really accomplished this in some way. And then the third part of backward design is actually then where we start really thinking about what instruction is really going to help us get them to that point of where they're being really successful with whatever it is that we've deemed, to be really solid evidence. Okay? So, how is this backwards? This is backward design. It comes from Wiggins and McTeague, UBD they call it sometimes. So, what's backwards about this versus how we normally kind of approach education? Why'd they call it backwards?
Start with the end.
Yeah, start with the end for
What
sure.
do you want things to look like at the end?
Yep, start with the end.
How do you get there?
Yeah. I think the other place Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we often start with just planning learning experiences and instruction. That's what we have to do every day. We walk into a classroom and we have to do something. So I think a lot of us tend to start there instead of with the
I think some of us kind of start in the middle a little bit too. You know, I think most of us have kind of got this figured out. Let's figure out what we're trying to do before we start doing it. But often I think we jump from this one to this one pretty frequently. And then we think, okay, now how can I assess whatever it was that I did here? Yeah. So it's really thinking end in mind, but it really is kind of a little bit of a different thought process too. I think people that are really effective in backwards design think a lot about this, and I think they really give this a lot of thought. What is it? What's the evidence that I'm going to see that's really going to convince the students that they've really gotten this thing? And then this is certainly not an afterthought. I mean, that's important too, but it's just a very different way, you know, of coming about it. So I think it's a really good way to think about it, and very different, you know, in many regards too.
I also think, Jay, too, that ultimately it requires an even bigger view of a curriculum, and it requires a bigger view of who your students are and where they're going.
Yep.
I mean, you can make this work for an individual course, but then I think you have to ask where that course fits into a larger program of study as
Exactly. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Well, let's spend a little bit of time with this one because, like I said, with assessment, I can't talk assessment without backward design, and I don't think you can talk assessment without objectives. I really don't think you can separate the two. With the objectives that you have, I think there's some different purposes for them that often we don't realize. But I think one of them is really that idea of conveying the intent to some others. And that could be colleagues in your department, it could be Deb Sullivan trainer, it could be department chair. But I think, to me, I think the missing part of the equation often is the students. You know, we often know what we want to do, but how well do we really communicate that to students? And what I'm going to suggest is that they probably are the most important of the other. Because what we're finding in research is that when students kind of see what it is they're learning and understand why we're investing time and energy in this, you know, the rate and the depth of learning actually both really increases pretty significantly. So the objectives can be helpful for that. Again, backward design, whatever those objectives are, those really will be forming the foundation of what your assessment's going to be. If you've spent time on these objectives, determined they're important, then I think it's really critical that you have very specific assessment points, you know, for each of those objectives. And then it really provides direction for the instruction, you know, those objectives. Through the years, I've watched, I know in the hundreds, maybe in the thousands of lessons, mostly in K-12 settings, but I've watched a fair number of college lessons as well, too. And when I see a lesson flounder, it doesn't matter if it's K-12 or at the college level, almost invariably the issue is that the instructor didn't have it real clear in their own mind what they were hoping to accomplish. Okay, they didn't have it clear, and because they weren't clear, that lesson tended to wander. Be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of that. And the students walk out of the room, and if you ask them, what'd you get out of this? You'd probably hear many, many, many different things because there wasn't a real clear focus, you know, to what was going on. So those objectives obviously drive not just assessment, but they really, really have got to drive very clearly, you know, what that instruction is going to look like. Jump in with comments, questions here too. When we're preparing objectives, there really are three big domains, you know, that we can be working in. And one of those domains, as you know, is just going to be the cognitive domain. And that's where we tend to spend an awful lot of our time as college instructors. And you know, this would just be an example of it. In your handout packet, you've got an explanation there, a much more in-depth explanation of what the cognitive domain is, and it would be really this particular sheet. So that's one domain that you can be functioning in. The other domain that you can be working with is just the psychomotor domain, and that's where you're concerned with motor skills, that type of thing. As I look around at the people in the room here, we don't have a lot of folks that are in the psychomotor domain, but if we had art people here, music people here, FIED people here, that's a lot of their world. You know, that's just another domain, you know, that they can function in. And then really the third domain, and this is one that often we as instructors, in my opinion, don't deal enough with, but it's where we're really focused on kind of the attitudes, the interests, the values, And it's often those affective things that really affect a student's interest, their confidence level, and what it is that they're doing. So what I would like to suggest for you, as an instructor, is certainly think about the cognitive domain. That's where we're functioning. But I would really encourage you to think about, in what I teach, are there some psychomotor pieces coming into play, and are there some affective pieces, that are really coming into play? So as objectives are written, I frequently will see instructors that might have one or two cognitive objectives, but then they might have an affective objective in there, because they see how that's going to really, have importance in that overall learning experience. So I guess what I'm urging you is to kind of think a little bit outside of the normal cognitive box that we like to think in kind of as Americans, and think about those other areas, just a little bit as well too. But the reality is we function mostly in the cognitive domain, and you've heard before about Bloom's taxonomy, and this would be a laid out version of it. This would be what's considered more lower level skills, taking it all the way up to the higher level skills. And there's another variation of this as well too, but I think still most people really turn toward this one. And in your package, you've got, on the cognitive domain, you've got an explanation of the different categories. And really, in a nutshell, this is what we're talking about: knowledge, simplified version of each of these, but comprehension, application, and so forth. And I think Bloom's taxonomy, it was created by Benjamin Bloom in 1956. I mean, this is old stuff, but it's still, I think, really pretty revolutionary in how we can think about our teaching in many ways. And the reality of it is that most teachers do tend to function, at these two levels. And I think that can be fine. It can be appropriate at times. It can also be pretty inappropriate at times. It just depends. Generally speaking, you want kind of some of these base pieces in place, then you can build the other ones. But there is pretty solid thinking about how actually a lot of this stuff can really happen simultaneously too. Okay? I am not one that would say you only deal with this and this and you never take them to that. I do think there's a way that you can bring really a blending of things. I taught a lesson yesterday, and I had actually been teaching on Bloom's taxonomy a little bit. I had students come back and kind of analyze the lesson I just taught. And in the lesson I taught, it was about a 40-minute lesson or so. Believe it or not, I'd actually hit every single one of these, in some regard. So it's very possible to kind of blend them together. But I think the real value of Bloom's taxonomy is to really help you think about, are you really pushing your students as much as you can? Are you laying foundations, that are going to be helpful for them in some way? Are you spending too much time, at the lower levels? It's conceivable to spend too much time here when you haven't built a foundation that's going to help them be successful with this kind of stuff. So it's just a really nice way for us to think about our teaching. When it comes to assessment, generally speaking, traditional forms of assessment can be pretty effective for this. They can be very efficient. Okay? I'm going to contend there's nothing wrong with a quiz at times, a test at times, because I think it's a very clean, very efficient, very effective way, of getting at some of these issues. When you're starting to try to assess some of these types of things, this one as well, then generally speaking, performance assessment is going to work a little bit better. It's a little harder to get at some of these issues. The one place I would kind of waver a little bit at what I'm saying is I do think some well-written multiple choice items actually can get you all the way down to here. But they've got to be really, really well written, to get yourself to there. But it's also a good way to think about what assessment tools are appropriate. If you are spending a lot of time in your course on the lower levels, it could be perfectly fine that you're using a number of quizzes, a number of tests. So just a way to think about that as well too. Jump in, comments, questions too if you'd like. Okay, in terms of writing objectives, I'm just going to hit these real fast, and I think it could be helpful. And this is really on the first page in your packet then. The idea being with objectives that we want, it's what we want from the learner. Okay, it's not what we're doing. Okay, it's about, this whole deal is about them. Okay, so it's what we want from the learner. You can see kind of a good example, a poor example. It also really needs to be something that's going to be observable. And that's where starting objectives with verbs is really helpful. This, the sheet that the series of 3 sheets that you've got here, the first one on the cognitive domain, this particular sheet is the one that I've used more as a professional educator than any other sheet. In fact, I have this laminated. If I didn't, mine would be trashed, by now. But what I do with this is, if I'm planning fairly broad objectives, I actually use this middle column here, and these are for writing what's called general instructional objectives. And these are verbs that are pretty broad, verbs like understands or verbs like applies, that kind of thing. So if I'm planning an entire course, or I've actually planned entire programs using this model, I'll start with, I call them GIOs. I'll start with those kind of broad verbs. And then with each of those broader ones, then it gets more specific with, I call them specific learning outcomes. And these are all verbs on the right-hand side that can be really helpful there. So when it comes to writing objectives, my suggestion is to start them with verbs, and these are things that students are going to be doing. There are some other ways of thinking about objective writing. There are a number of people that will have something like this, and then they'll add the word by, and then they'll talk about what that evidence might look like. Okay? So if you're kind of into pure backward design, that's often the model then. You'll have kind of this part, you'll have the by, and then an explanation of what that evidence is really going to look like. I think that's a good approach to things too. But then basically too, we want to measure just one thing in an outcome. Outcomes don't work terribly well when all of a sudden you package like 5 different things in there. Because then when you go to assess them, can you say, oh, they did great on the first one, and they kind of got the second part of it. But on the third part of this, they didn't get it all, and on the fourth part, they were wonderful. Have you achieved that objective? Like, who knows? You got 5 different things, going on in it. So, in my mind, anyhow, you're better off maybe having a few more, but get them to be something that you can really, really measure clearly and say, yes, you've achieved it, no, you haven't achieved it, that type of thing. Okay? So these charts, I think, are just super helpful. Cognitive domain, starting big picture, start with these, and then when you take it down to kind of the individual lesson, then I think these SLO verbs, can be particularly helpful then. All right, let's critique a couple objectives here. Let's just kind of play with them. Okay, and these are real simple ones. Tell me good, bad. Keep those criteria in mind now. Seize the value of an experiment. Thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think? Okay, thumbs down. Why, Nathan?
It's too vague. It's hard to judge.
Yep, it's not observable. How do you tell somebody sees the value of something? Okay, yeah, it's not a strong one. How about this one? Again, these are really simple. Thumbs up. All 3 of those things fit, right? This is what the learner is going to be doing. It's something that's observable, and we're measuring. We got one thing that's going on there. Okay, how about this one? Good one, bad one? What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all 3 parts of that word. How about this one? What's going on there? What's the issue with that one? Sarah will pick on you with the science one here.
You can't, how can you assess, understand, and know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 very different processes. Knows is basically regurgitation. It's like spit it back. Understands is a whole step beyond that. There are 2 different categories on Bloom's taxonomy. Got 2 very different things happening there. Yeah. How about this one? Good one for my kids.
No.
Okay. What's the issue with that one?
How do you know they realize it?
Yeah, it's really not very
They
observable.
could be neat.
Are you going to show
Yeah.
us how you change it? Because I think it's important, like in the affective domain, to value
Without a doubt.
an experiment.
So, yep, let's pick. Let's play with the first one. So how could we tweak this one?
Explains.
Okay, explains. Very similar to what I had you do at the start here when we were talking about assessment. Certainly do it. Explains is an interesting verb because explains can be a lower level. It can also be a higher level verb. On the sheet that you've got here, there's actually 5 of these verbs that show up in different places. So, you want to be careful if you're saying something's all of a sudden evaluation level. Is it really involving evaluation?
What if you defend it?
Yep, defense. Then all of a sudden you've taken it up. What level would you guess you're at with that? Yep, you're all the way up. Evaluation actually involves some kind of judgment based on some type of criteria. So when you're defending, you've got to be defending based on some criteria that would be there. Yep. So the intent of all these is great. It's just a matter of kind of getting more precise in what you're really looking for with them. Yep.
Do you know if have you seen any stuff out there that says that the effective teachers actually are using the right verb, or if they just know that part of what they want their students to do is value and experiment, whether they call it seeds or explain?
Well, this is where your assessment comes in, because so whatever your verb is that you've got here, your assessment has got to directly relate to that verb. So if I've got defends up there, whatever my assessment is, it needs to be about that defense. So those verbs are really critical because they shape what that assessment's going to look like. So I would say the most effective teachers really are kind of very precise with what they're going after.
Have you seen any research that shows that?
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
I'm just thinking of we read a book, best practices in college.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Same.
And I just
Yeah.
wondered if you looked into it, if they really were using the exact term, or if they were had it clear in their mind and maybe on paper that that's.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any empirical evidence I could point to on that, but a lot of anecdotal evidence, that's for sure. But yeah.
Barrett and I were just talking, because when he said defends the value assessment, it was interesting because he was looking at the cognitive domains, and then I was looking at the affective domains about valuing.
Yep.
And one of the words in valuing is justifies.
Yep.
So we've got defend as a comprehension verb, and then justifies as a valuing. What kind of assessment evidence would you use to see a justification or a defense?
That's kind of the age-old argument. How do you measure the affective, type things in ways too? And I think for the most part, I would say always, but I think there generally are ways to do it. It just takes a little more creativity on your part and a little more thought on your part. But there are ways, generally speaking, to get at.
Because value is knowing the worth. What worth does a student attach to it? So
I've done it
Yeah.
where I've given them like a statement that's kind of controversial and asked them to basically justify their stance on that statement, and then they're putting in some of their own understanding as well as some of the things that we talked about in the course.
Well, I'd like to finish off with kind of one thing to leave you thinking with here, and our time is always short at these things, but what I'd like to do is lay out just 9 principles, okay? And I pulled these 9 principles together. It doesn't mean that they're the magic 9. It doesn't mean there's not 10 or that there are 8. But anyhow, these are ones that I think, based on the work that I've done, are pretty critical. First one would be that idea of really aligning assessment, with the objectives. And to me, I think it's really critical, even to the point of in your syllabus, where I think it's really important that you actually let students see each of the assignments we have. What does this align with? Okay, does this particular assignment align with objective 1 and 3, objective 5, whatever it is? But I think that if we've worked hard at figuring out our objectives, I think we should also work equally hard at those assessments and let the students know what those alignments are. I've seen a lot of syllabus actually where the objectives are there and you would have no way in the world of ever knowing if the student had accomplished those objectives because that alignment was not there. So I think it's a really good practice for us personally just to put little numbers by those assignments. This connects with objective 1 or objective 5 or objective 14 or whatever it is. I think that's just a really, really critical practice. And the other thing I would say too is really think about content validity within your assessments. And by that, really what I'm talking about, and this is a simplified version of it, but are we adequately sampling everything that's been taught in our course? Students get really ticked off when we're assessing them on things that we have not taught or things that we've taught very little, then all of a sudden there's this major assessment component there. They also get really ticked off if we spend a lot of time on something and then they're never assessed on it, in some way. So I think good assessment is valid, it is reliable, and a part of that is that we're adequately sampling everything that's been taught. What often happens with us as instructors when we put a test together, a quiz together, we often remember what we most recently taught, and often that's unfairly weighted in the actual quiz. So I think it's important to look back at whatever period of time that quiz was covering, that test was covering. Am I adequately sampling everything that's been taught during this period of time? And students will really appreciate that. But it also adds so much more validity, to your assessment. And then an idea of really balancing the formative and the summative assessment. Formative assessment's taking place during your instruction. And I think maybe in the last 10 years, one of the most exciting things coming out of the field of assessment is the recognition of the value of that formative assessment. And it's not just to help us understand what our students are learning, but it's to really help them understand what they're learning. And often it can be very motivating for them if they see they're struggling in some way. It can be a confidence builder, for them as well too. But I think this is an exciting area. I don't want us to ever forget this though, because I think what good summative assessment does is it forces students to pull the pieces together. The thing I don't like about formative so much is it tends to be a little piece here, little piece here, little piece here. But I think good summative assessment forces students to bring all the pieces together. And that exercise in and of itself, I think, is really valuable at times too. Okay? So a balance of those two. Then the idea of really providing some formal and some informal assessment. When we think of assessment, we start thinking tests, quizzes, assignments, all that kind of stuff. But often the informal can speak more to students because sometimes it feels more personal to them. And it's just a simple comment that you might make in the room as they're working on something, about something they're doing, or a little comment you might make in the hall about something. It can be very informal, but often it can be really powerful, for students in many ways too. And I do think that often there are certain objectives that you're almost better off evaluating informally. I think they're more likely to hear what you have to say because it's just feeling more personal, more kind of person to person. And then the idea of making assessment a regular practice. I contend this is important because what happens with that is the anxiety level tends to be reduced on students. And there's a lot of interesting research on how anxiety affects test results for students. And if it becomes a more regular occurrence, oftentimes that anxiety level really cuts. And I'll kind of finish off quick here too. But really helping them understand what high quality work is. That's where rubrics, I think, are particularly helpful. I think that's where models can be really helpful. I'm a big believer in showing several models of something though, not just one. Is they'll tend to copy if it's just one thing. I like 3 models of something where it's still high quality work, but it might look very different, in some ways too. And then just the final 3, we talked about that idea of triangulating data just to get better, just to make a better judgment. And this is the big one that is, is obviously is the concern to students right now. Absolutely huge in a lot of ways. And then the idea of kind of what we're talking about to start, but really thinking about that, using that assessment data to really inform kind of what we're doing during the course, kind of making those adjustments as we go, but also thinking about how do I tweak this thing, next time around, where have I missed the boat a little bit with this thing to begin with. Yep. So your packet there, you've got the 9 there, but I would encourage you to spend a little time thinking, I call it, are you a walker with these? Or do you consider yourself a jogger with these, or do you feel like, hey, I kind of got this thing down, I'm pretty strong with this one. But do spend a little time thinking about yourself connected with each of these, and then I think those are some areas to kind of work on, the ones where you feel like you're a little more of a walker, a little more of a jogger, and something too. Okay, well thanks for coming today, I appreciate it, and we got 2 more sessions coming. Okay.